Have you ever witnessed the moment when pride crumbles before genuine faith? When those who mock the humble suddenly find themselves desperately needing what they once scorned? Today's narrative plunges into the raw vulnerability of a child's unwavering belief, colliding with privilege and skepticism, revealing how a single prayer can shatter the hardest hearts and transform the most impossible circumstances. This is a story about the crushing weight of mockery, but more profoundly about the inexplicable power of forgiveness that flows from the smallest vessels of faith. The boy's worn leather journal lay open on the grass, its pages fluttering like wounded butterflies in the afternoon breeze. Timothy Shepherd, 12 years old with hair the color of autumn wheat, sat cross-legged on the manicured lawn of Willowbrook Academy's courtyard, his grey cotton t-shirt already damp with nervous sweat. The simple wooden cross hanging from a leather cord around his neck caught the sunlight as he bent forward, lips moving silently over the words of Psalms. Harrison Blackstone III stood 3 feet away, his pristine navy polo shirt emblazoned with the number 38 in gold thread, the same number his father wore when he played lacrosse at Harvard. The tablet in Harrison's manicured hands displayed a swirling galaxy surrounded by scientific equations and atomic symbols. At 13, Harrison possessed the kind of confidence that only generations of wealth could purchase, his blonde hair styled with precision that matched his calculated smirk. "Still talking to your imaginary friend, Timothy?" Harrison's voice carried across the courtyard like a whip crack. "My father says prayer is just the primitive brain's attempt to find patterns in chaos. He has 3 PhDs, you know. From real universities, not some community college like where your dad teaches Sunday school." Timothy's fingers tightened on the journal's worn edges, but he didn't look up. The words of his grandmother echoed in his memory. "When they mock you, child, remember who was mocked first on that hill called Calvary. Look at this," Harrison continued, shoving the tablet toward Timothy's face. "This is real science. The universe explained through mathematics and observable phenomena. Not fairy tales about floods and talking snakes." He laughed, a sharp sound that drew the attention of other students lounging nearby. "My father's biotech company just secured a $2 billion contract. What has your God done for you lately? Fixed your father's broken truck? Oh wait, I saw it this morning, still leaking oil in the parking lot." Timothy finally raised his eyes, and Harrison was surprised to see not anger, but something else entirely: compassion. It was the same look Harrison had seen in his mother's eyes before she left, before his father's money couldn't keep her from walking away. "I pray for you every night, Harrison," Timothy said quietly, "and for your family." The laughter that erupted from Harrison's throat was forced, brittle. "Save your prayers for someone who needs them. My family owns half this city. We don't need anything from your God or anyone else." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained deceptively clear. Timothy closed his journal slowly, tucking it into his backpack alongside a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, not plastic, because his family reused everything they could. As he stood to leave, a single page fell from the journal, landing at Harrison's feet. Harrison picked it up, intending to tear it for dramatic effect, but the words stopped him cold. Prayer list. September. Harrison Blackstone and his family. That Harrison's mother returns safely, that Mr. Blackstone's heart softens, that their money becomes a blessing, not a burden, that Harrison finds peace. "You don't know anything about my mother," Harrison hissed, crumpling the paper in his fist. "She's in Europe, shopping. She'll be back next week." But Timothy had already walked away, his worn sneakers making no sound on the pristine concrete path. Harrison stood alone, the crumpled prayer list burning in his palm like a coal. His mother hadn't been shopping. She'd been in rehabilitation for 7 months, something his father's public relations team had managed to keep out of the newspapers. How could this poor kid know? That night, Harrison lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling painted with constellations that glowed in the dark, accurate to the millimeter according to NASA's star charts. His father was at another business dinner, the house empty except for the staff. He smoothed out the crumpled prayer list on his Egyptian cotton sheets, reading it again by the light of his phone. The storm that had threatened earlier arrived with vengeance at 3 in the morning. Not rain, but something else entirely. Harrison woke to his father shouting, a sound he'd never heard before. Not the controlled anger of a boardroom takeover, but raw, primal fear. "Where is she? Where is she?" Mr. Blackstone's voice cracked as he spoke into his phone. "What do you mean the plane is missing? That's impossible. I paid for the best pilots, the best equipment." Harrison crept to the top of the marble staircase, peering down at his father pacing in the foyer. Mr. Blackstone's usually perfect hair was disheveled, his silk tie hanging loose like a noose. Mrs. Blackstone's plane went down somewhere over the Atlantic. His father's assistant, a thin man named Pemberton, spoke quietly. The storm came out of nowhere. Search and rescue are deployed, but he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Harrison felt his world tilt. His mother, returning from the rehabilitation center in Switzerland, the trip his father had told everyone was a shopping excursion. The plane his father had insisted on chartering because commercial flights weren't secure enough for their family's privacy. "Get everyone," Mr. Blackstone commanded. "Every resource, every connection. I don't care what it costs." But 12 hours later, even billions couldn't change the reality. The search area was too vast, the storm too violent. The Coast Guard commander, standing in their palatial living room with his hat in his hands, delivered the words with military precision. "We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare for the worst." Harrison watched his father crumble, this titan of industry reduced to a man on his knees on the Italian marble floor. It was Pemberton who whispered something that made Harrison's blood run cold and hot at the same time. "Sir, perhaps, I know you don't believe in such things, but there's a boy at your son's school. The janitor tells me he prays for your family every day. The other staff say his prayers. They say things happen when he prays." Mr. Blackstone's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "Prayers? You're talking about prayers while my wife is dying in the ocean." "The boy's name is Timothy Shepard," Pemberton continued softly. "His father teaches at the community college, theology and ancient languages. The janitor, Mr. Wilson, says his own cancer went into remission after the boy prayed for him. The cafeteria worker's daughter was found after being missing for 3 days. All after this boy prayed." Harrison's hands trembled. The prayer list. Timothy knew about his mother before anyone else did. "Get them here," Mr. Blackstone said, his voice hollow. "I don't care if you have to drag them. Get them here now." An hour later, Timothy arrived with his father, a quiet man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. They looked so small in the vast foyer, Timothy still wearing the same grey T-shirt from school, his father in a flannel shirt with elbow patches. Professor Shepard carried a worn Bible, its leather cover soft with age. "You pray for my family," Mr. Blackstone said without preamble. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Timothy replied simply. "Why?" Timothy looked at Harrison, then back at his father. "Because everyone needs prayer, sir, especially those who think they don't. My wife's plane is down. They can't find her. They say she's probably—" Mr. Blackstone couldn't finish. "Can your God find her?" Professor Shepard stepped forward. "Mr. Blackstone, we didn't come here to make promises about—" "I didn't ask you," Mr. Blackstone interrupted. "I'm asking the boy. Can your God save my wife?" Timothy was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out his journal, the same one Harrison had mocked just yesterday. "God doesn't work like a vending machine, sir, but he hears every prayer." He opened to a page covered in careful handwriting. "I've been praying for Mrs. Blackstone for 7 months, since the day she left." Harrison's father staggered. "How did you—" "Mr. Wilson, the janitor. He overheard you crying in your office one night. He asked me to add your family to my prayers." Timothy looked up, his young face serious. "May I pray now?" What happened next would be debated in the Blackstone household for years to come. Timothy didn't kneel. He didn't raise his hands to heaven or speak in tongues. He simply stood there, a 12-year-old boy in a worn T-shirt, and spoke as if talking to a friend standing right beside him. "Father, you see Mrs. Blackstone right now. You know exactly where she is. If she's still breathing, keep her breathing. If she's in the water, be her life raft. If she's afraid, be her courage. Give the searchers eyes to see what they're missing. And Lord," Timothy paused, glancing at Harrison, "help this family understand that you've been here all along, waiting for them to just ask." The prayer lasted less than 2 minutes. No dramatic music swelled. No light burst through the windows. But something shifted in the room, something Harrison couldn't explain with science or logic. 20 minutes later, Mr. Blackstone's phone rang. The Coast Guard commander's voice was incredulous. "Sir, we found something. A commercial fishing vessel 30 miles outside our search grid just pulled a woman from the water. She's hypothermic, but alive. She says her name is Victoria Blackstone." The room erupted. Mr. Blackstone collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Pemberton was already coordinating medical helicopters, but Harrison stood frozen, staring at Timothy, who was quietly closing his journal. "How?" Harrison whispered. Timothy shrugged. "I don't know the how. I just know the who." The fishing vessel, they would learn later, had changed course because of what the captain described as the strangest feeling, like something pulling us southeast. They found Victoria Blackstone clinging to a piece of debris, her emergency beacon having failed in the storm. She'd been in the water for 14 hours, far longer than anyone should have survived in those temperatures. As the chaos of coordination swirled around them, Harrison approached Timothy. The prayer list, still crumpled, was in his pocket. "Yesterday Harrison couldn't finish. "I know," Timothy said simply. "Why didn't you hate me? I was cruel. I mocked everything you believe in." Timothy smiled, the kind of smile that seemed too wise for a 12-year-old face. "Because hurt people, Harrison, and you've been hurting for a long time." Professor Shepard placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "We should go. Your mother will be wondering where we are." As they turned to leave, Mr. Blackstone's voice stopped them. "Wait." He stood, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes red. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't thank me," Timothy said. "Thank him." "I don't know how," Mr. Blackstone admitted, the words seeming to physically pain him. "I've spent so many years believing I had all the answers. Science, logic, money, control." Professor Shepard spoke for the first time since the prayer. "Faith isn't about having answers, Mr. Blackstone. It's about trusting the one who does." "Will you?" Mr. Blackstone swallowed hard. "Will you teach us? Will you show us how to pray?" Harrison watched his father, this giant of industry, humbled before a community college professor and his son. Pride, he realized, was just fear wearing an expensive suit. "Dad," Harrison said, his voice cracking, "I want to learn too." The following Sunday, the Blackstone family's luxury SUV looked out of place in the gravel parking lot of Shepherd's small church. Victoria Blackstone, wrapped in a cashmere shawl to hide the bandages, held her husband's hand as they walked through the simple wooden doors. Harrison carried something in his hands, his tablet, powered off, and Timothy's prayer list, carefully smoothed and preserved between 2 sheets of glass. The congregation, mostly working families and elderly folks on fixed incomes, made room in the pews without fanfare. No one mentioned the Blackstone Corporation or the billions or the miracle at sea. They simply nodded and smiled, the way people do when family comes home. Timothy sat with his parents 3 rows from the front, his journal open to a new page. Harrison, sitting behind him, could see over his shoulder. The prayer list had new additions. Prayer list, September, continued. Thanksgiving for Mrs. Blackstone's rescue, for the Blackstone family's new journey, for Harrison's heart to heal, for humility to replace pride, for faith to grow where doubt once lived. Pastor Daniels, a man who worked construction during the week to support his ministry, spoke about storms that morning. Not the kind that sink ships, but the kind that sink souls. About how sometimes God allows us to reach the end of our own strength so we can discover His. Peter walked on water, the pastor said, his voice gentle but firm, right up until he looked at the waves instead of the one who commanded them. But here's the beautiful part. When Peter sank, when he cried out, "Lord, save me," Jesus didn't lecture him about his lack of faith. He immediately reached out his hand and caught him. Harrison felt his mother's hand find his, her fingers still cold from her ordeal. On his other side, his father sat rigid, but Harrison could see tears streaming down his face. After the service, as the congregation shared a potluck lunch in the fellowship hall, Harrison found himself sitting beside Timothy at a folding table covered with a paper tablecloth. They ate fried chicken from paper plates and drank sweet tea from plastic cups, a far cry from the catered meals Harrison was accustomed to. "I've been thinking about what you said," Harrison began, pushing macaroni and cheese around his plate. "About hurt people hurting people." Timothy waited, patient in the way that seemed beyond his years. "My mother left because of me," Harrison continued, the words tumbling out. "Not just because of the drinking. She started drinking because I was becoming like him, like my father, cold, calculating, cruel." He looked at his hands. "I found her journal. She wrote that she didn't recognize her own son anymore. That money had poisoned everything it touched in our family. But she came back," Timothy said softly. "She came back different. The rehabilitation, it wasn't just for alcohol. It was spiritual too. She found faith there in Switzerland. That's why my father was so angry. He felt like he was losing her to what he called religious delusion. And now?" Harrison glanced across the room where his parents stood together, his father awkwardly attempting to help serve food, his mother laughing at his clumsy efforts with the serving spoon. "Now I think maybe she wasn't lost. Maybe she was found." An elderly woman approached their table, her walker clicking against the linoleum floor. "You're the Blackstone boy," she said to Harrison, not unkindly. "Yes, ma'am." She reached out a wrinkled hand and patted his cheek. "Timothy's been praying for you since you started at that school. Every week, he'd add something new. Help Harrison with his science test. Comfort Harrison when his mother leaves. Show Harrison he's loved." She smiled. "That boy prays like most people breathe. Constant and necessary." Harrison turned to Timothy, stunned. "How long?" "Since the first day you mocked me," Timothy admitted. 3 years ago, when you said my shoes were probably from a dumpster." "They were from the thrift store," Harrison said, remembering. "I was horrible." "Yes," Timothy agreed simply, "but God specializes in changing horrible into holy. Look at Paul. He held the coats while Stephen was stoned and then became the greatest apostle." That afternoon, as the Blackstones prepared to leave, Mr. Blackstone approached Professor Shepherd. "I want to make a donation to the church. Anonymous, of course." Professor Shepherd shook his head. "With respect, Mr. Blackstone, this church doesn't need your money. It needs your presence, your family, your story." He gestured to the simple sanctuary. "These walls have stood for 60 years without a Blackstone fortune, but they've been waiting for Blackstone hearts." Over the following weeks, changes rippled through the Blackstone household like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The family dinners, once rare and silent affairs, became daily gatherings. Harrison's father started coming home at 6 instead of midnight. The tablet, with its scientific equations, found itself sharing space with Timothy's gifted journal, where Harrison began writing his own prayers, awkward and honest. The real test came 3 weeks later. Harrison's science teacher, Dr. Brennan, announced a special project. Students would present on the topic, "What I Believe and Why." And it was meant to encourage critical thinking, but everyone knew it was really Dr. Brennan's way of promoting scientific materialism. Harrison stood before the class, his presentation remote in one hand, Timothy's prayer list in the other. On the screen behind him appeared not the expected equations and theorems, but a photo of his mother being pulled from the ocean. 3 weeks ago, my mother should have died," Harrison began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Water temperature 48 degrees Fahrenheit, time in water 14 hours, probability of survival, according to Coast Guard statistics, less than 1%. He clicked to the next slide. A photo of Timothy's journal page with the prayer for his mother's safe return, dated the morning before her plane went down. This was written before anyone knew her plane would crash, before the storm that came out of nowhere. So before a fishing vessel inexplicably changed course and found her exactly where they shouldn't have been looking. Dr. Brennan frowned. "Mr. Blackstone, coincidences are not evidence of—" "You're right," Harrison interrupted. "They're not, which is why I spent the last 3 weeks investigating." He clicked again. The screen filled with data. 17 documented cases of Timothy Shepard's specific prayers correlating with statistically improbable outcomes. Mr. Wilson's stage 4 pancreatic cancer, complete remission. The Hendersons' missing daughter, found in a locked shipping container that had already been searched twice. Mrs. Chen's son woke from a coma after 3 months, exactly as Timothy prayed on his birthday. The class was silent. Timothy, sitting in the back row, had his head bowed, uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not saying science is wrong," Harrison continued. "I'm saying it's incomplete. There are things that can't be measured in a laboratory or explained by equations. My mother is alive because a 12-year-old boy talked to someone I couldn't see, and a fishing boat captain followed a feeling he couldn't explain." Dr. Brennan stood. "Mr. Blackstone, this is a science classroom, not a church. What you're describing is confirmation bias and, with respect, Dr. Brennan, you taught us that good scientists consider all data, not just the data that confirms their hypotheses." Harrison pulled out his tablet, the one that had displayed the universe and its equations that day in the courtyard. "I still believe in science, but I also believe science is just one language God uses to speak to us." After class, Harrison found Timothy at his usual spot in the courtyard. But this time, Harrison sat beside him, pulling out his own journal. "Teach me," Harrison said simply. "Teach you what? How to pray like it matters, like you do." Timothy smiled. "First rule, it always matters, even when it feels like you're talking to the ceiling." He opened his journal to a fresh page. "Start with gratitude, not for the big things. Those are easy. Be grateful for the small things, the forgotten things." Harrison thought for a moment, then began writing. "Thank you for the sound of my mother's laughter at breakfast. Thank you for my father asking about my day. Thank you for Timothy's patience when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for shipwrecks that become salvations." As he wrote, a memory surfaced. His grandmother, who died when he was 7, used to pray with him before bed. Simple prayers about guardian angels and daily bread. His father had stopped that after she died, saying it was time Harrison grew up and faced reality. "My grandmother believed," Harrison said suddenly. "I'd forgotten. She used to say that money was just paper and metal, but faith was treasure you could take with you. She sounds wise. My father thought she was foolish, provincial, uneducated." Harrison's voice caught. "But she was the only one who ever looked at me like I was more than just the heir to the Blackstone fortune." That night, Harrison did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He knocked on his parents' bedroom door. His mother was reading, his father working on his laptop, but they both looked up when he entered. "I want to tell you both something," Harrison said, holding his journal. "I've been angry. At Mom for leaving, at Dad for being absent even when he was here, at myself for becoming someone I don't like." He took a breath. "But I'm learning that forgiveness isn't just about saying the words. It's about choosing to let go of the anger, even when it feels justified." His mother set down her book, tears already forming. His father closed his laptop slowly. "I forgive you both," Harrison continued, "and I hope you can forgive me for the person I became. The cruel, mocking person who thought money made me better than everyone else." What followed was something the Blackstone family had never experienced. Raw, honest conversation. Tears, admissions, apologies that went deeper than words. They talked until 3 in the morning, and when they finally slept, it was the first peaceful sleep any of them had experienced in years. The transformation wasn't instant or perfect. There were days when old habits resurfaced, when Harrison's pride reared up, when his father retreated into work, when his mother struggled with the urge to numb herself. But there was something different now. They had an anchor. Every Sunday, the Blackstone SUV parked in the gravel lot. Every Wednesday, Harrison attended youth group with Timothy, learning to see faith not as weakness, but as the ultimate strength. Every morning, the family prayed together before breakfast, awkward prayers that gradually became natural conversations with the God they were learning to know. 6 months later, at the school's spring showcase, Harrison presented his final project. Not about science or technology or his father's billions, but about transformation. He called it the hypothesis of hope. 6 months ago, I believed that everything could be explained, quantified, and controlled, he told the assembled parents and students. I mocked those who believed otherwise. I especially mocked Timothy Shepard, who had the audacity to pray for me while I was cruel to him. He clicked to show a photograph. The Blackstone family at the church potluck, his father serving soup, his mother laughing with the elderly ladies, Harrison himself playing basketball with kids from the youth group. But I learned that the most important things in life can't be measured or bought. Love, faith, forgiveness, grace. He looked at Timothy in the audience. And I learned that sometimes the smallest among us carry the greatest power, not because of what they have, but because of who they know. The presentation ended with a video. Harrison and Timothy sitting in the courtyard where their story began, each reading from their journals. Not to each other, but together, their voices joining in a prayer for their school, their families, their city. For those who mock, that they might find mercy. For those who hurt, that they might find healing. For those who have everything, that they might discover what they're missing. For those who have nothing, that they might know their infinite worth. When the video ended, the auditorium was silent. Then, slowly, applause began. Not the polite clapping of a school presentation, but something deeper. Dr. Brennan stood first, tears on his skeptical face. Then others. A standing ovation not for Harrison's presentation skills or production value, but for the courage of transformation, the bravery of admitting you were wrong. After the showcase, Mr. Blackstone found Professor Shepard in the hallway. I'm starting a foundation, he said. Not a tax shelter or a PR move, something real. I want to fund families like yours, professors and teachers and servants who shape kids like Timothy. Will you help me do it right? Professor Shepard smiled. On one condition. Timothy helps choose the recipients. That boy sees need before anyone else does. As the families gathered in the parking lot, Harrison and Timothy stood together, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. You know what the strangest part is, Harrison said. I can still see the science in those stars. The fusion, the gravity, the light traveling millions of years. But now I also see the artist behind the art. Timothy nodded. Both things can be true. Hey, Timothy? Yeah? Thank you for praying for me when I didn't deserve it. That's the thing about prayer, Harrison. And about grace. It's never about deserving. A year later, Victoria Blackstone published a memoir about her near-death experience and her family's transformation. She donated all proceeds to the Timothy Shepard Foundation for Young Prayer Warriors. In the dedication, she wrote, "To the boy who prayed in secret for those who mocked him in public, to the God who hears every prayer, even from the depths of the ocean, and to everyone who thinks they're too far gone, too proud, too broken, or too lost to be found. You're not." The book included a photo that became famous in certain circles. Harrison's tablet displaying complex equations, sitting beside Timothy's worn journal, both boys' hands resting on their respective treasures, finally understanding that truth isn't diminished by being shared, but multiplied. Harrison kept the original prayer list, now framed in his room beside his numerous academic awards. But the award he treasured most was a simple certificate from the church youth group, Most Transformed Heart, Harrison Blackstone III. Years later, when Harrison became a renowned scientist who never started a lecture without a moment of silent prayer, he would tell his students, "The universe is vast and complex and beautiful. We can spend our lives studying it and barely scratch the surface. But the real mystery isn't in the stars or the atoms or the equations. It's in the fact that the God who spun galaxies into being cares about the prayers of a 12-year-old boy for his bully." He would always end with the same words. Science tells us how. Faith tells us why. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we meet someone who shows us both. Timothy Shepard went on to become a chaplain, serving in hospitals where science and faith worked hand in hand to heal bodies and souls. He kept journals his entire life, filling thousands of pages with prayers. In every single one, the Blackstone family appeared. And in the quiet moments, when Harrison worked late in his laboratory, developing medical technologies that would save countless lives, he would sometimes pause, pull out his own journal and write, "Thank you for Timothy Shepard. Thank you for unanswered prayers that led to better answers. Thank you for humiliation that became humility. Thank you for mockery that became ministry. Thank you for teaching me that the smallest seed of faith can move the biggest mountains of pride." The storm that brought the Blackstones to their knees had passed, but the rainbow it left behind painted their lives in colors they never knew existed. Colors that couldn't be explained by the refraction of light alone, but by the promise of the one who holds both the light and the prism. In the end, the boy who was mocked for his faith didn't defend it with arguments or apologetics. He simply lived it, prayed it, breathed it into being. And in doing so, he saved not just a woman from the ocean, but an entire family from drowning in their own success. The wooden cross Timothy wore, simple and worn, became more valuable to Harrison than all his family's wealth. Because he finally understood, some treasures can't be bought. They can only be received with empty hands and an open heart. And every night in houses across the city, two boys who started as enemies ended their days the same way, on their knees, in conversation with the God who heard them both, the rich and the poor, the mocker and the mocked, and loved them exactly the same. For where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I among them. Even if one is wearing a designer polo and the other a thrift store t-shirt. Even if one started with mockery and the other with mercy, even then, especially then,